You burst into the glittering mansion, rain still dripping from your hair, your heart aching as you think of your little girl fighting for breath in the hospital. Surrounded by elegant laughter and glowing lights, you fall to your knees, begging your parents, believing that family must be the final refuge. But instead of open arms, you're met with cold refusals, as if your child's fragile life mattered less than a lavish celebration. In that instant, the world beneath you collapses. And from that very moment, an unexpected journey begins, one where you must choose between clinging to blood ties or forging a future built by your own strength. If you love heartfelt drama stories, a gentle like and subscribe will keep you close for every twist yet to come. You used to believe that family was the anchor that would never drift away. No matter how many storms battered your small world, you thought you could always return to the house where marble floors gleamed and chandeliers sparkled. You worked hard, you kept silent, and you asked for nothing, not when the roof leaked, not when bills piled up, not even when your dreams needed wings. Deep down, you carried a quiet faith. When the moment came, they would be there for you. But now, standing outside in the rain-soaked night, you realize how fragile that faith truly was. You remember the way your mother's eyes darted past you as though your presence was a stain on her perfect evening. You remember your father's clenched jaw, his glance at the watch on his wrist, as though every second spent listening to you was stealing from Blake's celebration. You recall the crystal glasses raised and toasts just a few steps away, laughter echoing while you pleaded for your daughter's chance at life. Still, you remember the years before that night. The times you tried to prove yourself, hoping to earn even a fraction of their pride. When you built your small business from nothing, you thought maybe, just maybe, they would look at you the way they looked at Blake. But instead, you became the shadow child, the one tolerated but never truly celebrated. It began long before adulthood. At school plays, you scanned the crowd of parents, praying to see their faces. Too often, the seats stayed empty. On birthdays, gifts for Blake were wrapped in glittering paper, while yours arrived late or not at all. You told yourself it was fine, that maybe they simply forgot, but deep down you understood the truth. You were never the favorite. Their affection wasn't evenly shared, it was conditional, and you rarely met the conditions. Even so, you built your life without their support. You fell in love with Mark, a man whose kindness outweighed every flaw. Together you welcomed Zoe into the world, her laughter becoming the heartbeat of your small home. And while money was always tight, love was abundant. You filled her world with bedtime stories, sidewalk chalk drawings, and forts built from blankets and chairs. The life you made wasn't perfect, but it was yours, and for a while, it was enough. But the comparisons never stopped. At family dinners, Blake's promotions, his fiancée's designer ring, their planned honeymoon all became the centerpiece of conversation. Your business milestones were brushed aside with polite nods. "That's nice," close quote, they'd say, before shifting back to him. And you smiled, swallowing the sting, because peace seemed worth more than conflict. You convinced yourself you didn't need their recognition, until the night came when recognition might have saved your child. That's why it cut so deeply when the engagement party became the stage for the cruelest truth. They had chosen spectacle over substance, appearances over love, and a party over life. The daughter you carried, the granddaughter who had drawn them pictures with crayons, meant less than a banquet hall deposit. Still, your heart whispered one last hope as you left the house. Maybe tomorrow, maybe when they had time to think, they would call. Maybe compassion would find them in the quiet hours of the night. But morning came with no phone call, no message, not even a trace of concern. Instead, you were left staring at the hospital monitors, counting the rise and fall of Zoe's tiny chest, and praying for a miracle. You walked the cold hallways, shoes echoing against the tile, clutching paperwork filled with numbers you couldn't meet. Nurses passed by with sympathetic smiles, but sympathy couldn't pay the surgeon. Every office you called, every loan you requested, ended with the same phrase: denied. And with each denial, the clock ticked louder. As the hours dragged on, you replayed memories like worn tapes. The birthdays where your parents forgot to show up, the graduations where they left early, the holidays where your gifts were quietly returned for store credit. Each memory became another brick in the wall you hadn't realized they had been building between you and them for years. And with every brick, you were pushed further into the role of the outsider. But here, in the harsh white light of the hospital, that role no longer broke you. It hardened you. Because as your daughter clutched her stuffed rabbit and whispered, "Mommy, will it hurt?" Close quote, you realized that the only thing that mattered was finding a way anyway to keep her alive. Mark stood beside you, exhausted but steadfast. His hand never left yours, even when the loan officers said no, even when the numbers refused to add up, even when the weight of failure pressed on both of your shoulders. And when he slid that crumpled check across the table, the money from selling his beloved car, you saw in his tired eyes the truth that had been missing all along. Love chooses, even when it hurts. That was the difference. Your parents loved conditions. They loved appearances. They loved Blake's spotless reputation. But Mark loved you without measure. Tom and Denise would soon prove that love too, but even before they arrived at your door, you began to sense a shift inside yourself. You understood, in that painful first chapter of your reckoning, that blood is not the same as bond. And once that truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. So, as you sat in that dimly lit kitchen, with rejection letters scattered like confetti across the counter, you started to breathe differently. Each breath carried a vow. If your parents would not save your daughter, you would. And if the world insisted on closing its doors, you would carve out windows with your bare hands. Because you were no longer the forgotten child. You were the mother of a girl whose laughter deserved a future. And nothing, not even betrayal, could take that fire away. In that silence, you remembered a moment from childhood. You had once asked your mother if she thought you were special. She had smiled faintly, adjusted her bracelet, and said, "Everyone is special in their own way." But then she had turned to Blake, praising his drawing of a crooked house, as though it belonged in a gallery. You had tucked that moment away, too small to matter then. But now, as you fought for Zoe's life, it surfaced, sharp and undeniable. The pattern had always been there, you had just chosen not to see it. And while this was only the beginning, the steps you took in those desperate hours would shape the rest of your life. They would turn rejection into resilience, loss into fuel, and pain into purpose. If you've ever known the sting of being overlooked in your own family, then you understand how those moments carve themselves into your memory. And if you've ever wondered what you would do when left with nothing but your will, then you'll know why this story matters. And perhaps, as you listen, you'll realize something too. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal becomes the spark that ignites your greatest transformation. If this story has stirred something inside you, gently tap like or subscribe, not just to follow along, but to remind yourself that resilience is possible, even in the face of heartbreak. You thought the silence after that night might be temporary. Perhaps your parents would call once the guests left, once the champagne glasses were cleared away, once the echoes of music faded. You clung to the hope that remorse might find them in the quiet hours. But the next morning, the only sound was the steady beeping of hospital monitors and the weary shuffle of nurses' shoes. Your phone stayed silent. Not one call. Not one message. Not even a word asking if Zoe had survived the night. The absence was louder than any insult. It was proof that you were no longer a daughter in their eyes, only a disruption to the perfect image they guarded so tightly. Meanwhile, Blake's name filled the family group chat you had long muted. Photos of his engagement night, of sparkling rings and lavish decorations, flowed in like a flood. And though you told yourself not to look, curiosity won. One picture froze your breath. The three of them, your parents and your brother, raising glasses, their faces glowing with pride. No one would have guessed that at the same time, just a few miles away, a little girl's life was balancing on a thread. Your parents' refusal was not just a denial of money, it was the clearest declaration of where you stood. They had chosen their celebration, their reputation, their polished circle of friends, over your child's fragile heartbeat. The betrayal did not scream. It whispered in every silence, every empty seat, every ignored call. You tried to stay strong for Zoe. Each time she stirred, you pressed her small hand and whispered stories about parks you would visit, rivers you would walk beside, summers you would spend chasing fireflies. But in the corner of your mind, the numbers loomed. The cost of surgery, the payments you could not make, the days slipping away faster than you could catch them. Mark did everything he could. He sold his beloved car, he emptied the savings meant for retirement, he cashed out a piece of his future to save your daughter's present. And still, the gap yawned wide. You watched the weight on his shoulders grow heavier, yet he never faltered. He simply said, "We'll find another way." But how many doors could you knock on before every answer was no? How many tears could you shed before the well inside you ran dry? Each rejection letter, each declined loan, was another stone tied to your chest. And still, you refused to sink. Because while your parents had abandoned you, you couldn't abandon Zoe. Then, when hope was almost gone, the doorbell rang at dawn. You opened it to find Tom and Denise standing there, weary but determined. They weren't dressed in silks or pearls, just worn jackets and shoes softened by years of use. In their eyes, you saw something your parents had never given you. A love that needed no conditions. When they placed the envelope on your table, you trembled. Inside was the money they had earned from selling their cabin, the little home they had built board by board, meant to be their retirement sanctuary. They gave it up without hesitation. Not because it was convenient, not because it was easy, but because love had asked, and they had answered. You broke down, not from weakness, but from the unbearable contrast. While your parents guarded their fortune for chandeliers and grand halls, Mark's parents had dismantled their dream to save yours. The weight of gratitude pressed harder than the weight of betrayal, because one revealed the depth of cruelty, and the other the height of sacrifice. At the hospital, the payment was finally made. Papers signed, surgery scheduled. The relief was sharp and almost painful, like air flooding into lungs that had nearly drowned. You sat in the waiting room clutching Zoe's rabbit, praying as hours stretched into eternity. Mark held your hand, Tom paced the halls, Denise whispered comfort you didn't even know you needed. When the surgeon finally emerged with tired eyes and a small smile, you knew the impossible had been done. "She's going to make it," close quote, he said, and the room tilted with the force of your sobs. You had walked through fire, and though the scars would remain, your daughter's heart beat stronger than ever. And yet even then the betrayal did not end. Days later, a message arrived from Blake. "Mom wants to know if Zoe survived," close quote, he wrote, followed by, "Also, you caused a scene at the engagement party. Don't bring drama to the wedding." The words sank into you like ice. Not only had they refused to help, they had turned your desperation into gossip, a story whispered to their wealthy friends to protect their image. It was then you knew something had died forever. Not Zoe, she was alive, safe, and healing, but the bond you had once believed in. The core that tied you to your parents had been severed, not by you, but by their choice. They had cut at the moment they decided appearances were worth more than blood. And so, a shift began inside you. The person who once begged for recognition, who once bent to please, who once sought a seat at their table, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, unafraid to walk away. You would no longer be defined by their approval, nor by their rejection. You would build something new, something they could never take from you. If betrayal is a knife, then love is the salve that heals the wound. Tom and Denise showed you that. Mark reminded you of it daily. And Zoe's laughter, weak at first but growing stronger, became the proof that life had given you another chance. This was the turning point, the place where your story split. On one side, the family who chose wealth over love. On the other, the family who chose love even when it cost everything. And you, standing in the middle, knew where you belonged. And so, while betrayal burned, it also illuminated the truth. Blood alone does not define family. Actions do. Choices do. And in those choices, you finally saw who your true family was. If this chapter has touched something deep within you, consider sharing a gentle like or subscribe, not as a routine, but as a way to honor stories of love that triumph over betrayal. Sometimes, the smallest gesture reminds us that we're not alone in what we've endured. The waiting room that once felt like a prison of uncertainty slowly became a place of cautious hope. Hours had passed with the rhythm of a clock that seemed determined to drag, but when the surgeon finally emerged and whispered the words you had begged to hear, "She's going to make it," your body gave way to tears you hadn't allowed yourself before. Relief was not gentle. It broke you open like a storm, washing away the suffocating weight of dread. The days that followed were not easy. Zoe's recovery was fragile, her tiny chest rising under the hum of machines, her body adjusting to the new rhythm her heart had been granted. You sat by her bed, holding her hand through the nights when shadows felt too heavy, whispering promises that you would build a world safe enough for her to dream in. Mark became your strength, though exhaustion painted his face. He carried the burdens quietly, bringing meals, handling calls, keeping your business afloat with clumsy determination. And every evening, Tom and Denise arrived with containers of food, their quiet presence a constant reminder that family can be found where love is offered freely. It was in those small, ordinary acts, soup poured into plastic bowls, bedtime stories told in waiting chairs, that you felt the deepest kind of wealth. Not the kind measured in accounts or jewels, but in the willingness to show up when everything feels broken. And yet, betrayal found ways to return. A message from Blake arrived, blunt and thoughtless. "Don't bring your drama to the wedding. We've had enough." The words cut, not because they surprised you, but because they confirmed what you already knew. To them, your pain was not real. It was an inconvenience, a story they wished to silence. Your parents' silence became louder than words. They did not visit, did not send flowers, did not acknowledge the miracle unfolding in the hospital room. Instead, rumors reached you through whispers. At gatherings, they told friends that you had been reckless, that you had failed to plan, that Zoe's condition was the result of your poor choices. Their concern was not for you, nor for her, it was for their reputation. For a time, that knowledge pressed heavy on your chest. But as you watched Zoe's cheeks regain color, as you saw her giggle softly when Tom taught her to imagine casting a fishing line from her hospital bed, they asked why they should choose you. And you told them. You told them about designing not just spaces, but sanctuaries. You showed them sketches drawn with sleepless eyes, infused with a vision shaped by nights in hospital corridors. And when you revealed the story of the cabin, how Tom and Denise had sacrificed their dream to save Zoe, and how you had rebuilt a space worthy of their love, the room fell silent. Even hardened executives leaned forward, captivated not by polished statistics, but by sincerity that could not be fabricated. When the contract was awarded to you, the paper trembling in your hands, you felt something deeper than victory. It was not just about business, it was about reclaiming dignity stolen in whispers and refusals. You walked out of that room knowing that the path you had chosen, forged from ashes, was leading you somewhere your parents could never have imagined. Your business grew, piece by piece. Employees came, drawn not only by your vision, but by the warmth of your mission. You vowed that no worker of yours would ever face what you'd endured. Healthcare came first, family leave was honored, compassion was woven into the fabric of your company. Meanwhile, your parents' empire faltered. The furniture store they cherished lost contracts, their mansion grew quiet, debts piled high. Friends who once filled their halls drifted away, drawn toward new names, fresher wealth. You learned of it through murmurs, but by then, their decline no longer pierced you. It was simply background noise to the life you were building. And still, betrayal left traces. Late at night, you sometimes wondered why. Why they could not love you without conditions. Why they could not see Zoe as the treasure she was. But each time those thoughts arose, you turned to the family beside you, Mark's steady hand, Tom's laughter, Denise's home-cooked meals, and Zoe's bright eyes, and the questions faded. You no longer needed answers from people who had already chosen absence. The true LTKO the turn was not when you signed that contract, nor when your parents' world collapsed. It was when you realized you no longer needed their recognition at all. The very thing you once chased had lost its power. In its place stood something unshakable. The knowledge that you were building a life on your own terms, surrounded by those who had proven their love through sacrifice, not words. That was the moment you understood. Betrayal may wound, but it does not define. What defines you are the choices you make after. And you chose to rise. Success did not arrive as a thunderclap. It came slowly, like the sunrise after a night too long, painting the world in colors you had almost forgotten. Contracts followed, your company grew, and suddenly you were no longer working from the kitchen table, but walking into an office with your name etched on glass. The very things that once felt impossible, the expansion, the recognition, the stability, now stood as proof that you had built something lasting. Your days filled with movement. Designers filled desks, clients called for your vision, and publications wanted your story. But even as success surrounded you, you never forgot the nights of soup in hospital waiting rooms, the echoes of footsteps in sterile halls, the desperate prayers whispered into silence. Those memories were not weights anymore. They were compass points, guiding you to lead with compassion. At home, Zoe's laughter became the sound that healed you. She played piano on keys bought with your first bonus, her small fingers dancing where IV lines once tethered her. She asked questions with the curiosity of a child who had survived storms. Why don't Grandma and Grandpa love me the way Tom and Denise do? And though the question twisted inside you, you answered gently, explaining that sometimes love comes not from where you expect, but from those who choose to stand beside you. Mark remained your steady presence. Together, you turned each milestone into a quiet celebration, a shared meal, a walk in the park, a bedtime story told with more gratitude than before. And through it all, Tom and Denise stayed, woven into your daily life like threads that refused to fray. Their love had cost them a cabin, but it had built a family stronger than blood. Meanwhile, the world of your parents cracked. Rumors whispered through acquaintances. Their business contracts were vanishing, their once glittering name fading from guest lists. Their mansion, once filled with parties, grew quiet. Eventually, you heard what you once thought impossible. They were on the edge of losing everything. The first time they reached out, you let the call go unanswered. The second time, you listened to the voicemail but deleted it before the end. By the third, curiosity tugged, and you pressed play. The voice that once spoke with authority now trembled, pleading for help, for understanding, for another chance. But memories don't erase so easily. They linger like faint scars under the skin, invisible to most, but felt with every shift of light. You remembered, as if it had happened only yesterday, the night you had stood in the marble foyer. Rainwater dripped steadily from your coat, pooling across the polished floor. Your voice cracked, your words trembling as you begged not for yourself, but for your daughter's life. Every syllable had been a plea carved from love and desperation. Yet the silence in return felt louder than thunder. You remembered your mother adjusting her bracelet as though your words were no more than an inconvenience, her eyes fixed anywhere but on you. You remembered your father glancing at his watch, impatient with your pain, already considering which dinner party he might be late for. You remembered Blake, champagne in hand, lips curled into a sneer that told you exactly how much pleasure he found in your humiliation. That night, you had walked away with nothing but a sound of rain pounding the pavement and a hardened resolve that no door like that would ever close on you again. And now, 3 years later, they wanted to rewrite that night with a single phone call. As if memory could be undone by convenience. As if silence could be erased with need. Eventually, they came in person. You watched them step into your office, and time itself seemed to stagger behind them. Your father's once commanding posture was bent, his back curved by burdens he could no longer hide. Your mother's manicured hands trembled as she clutched not a leather designer bag, but a worn handbag frayed at the edges. They stood in the space you had built, a place filled with clean lines, minimalist furniture, shelves holding awards for your designs, and framed photographs of Zoe laughing with Tom and Denise. The contrast was brutal. They had once looked at you as a liability. Now they looked at you as their last chance. Their eyes flickered across the office, and in that flicker was something their mouths would never admit: regret. When they finally spoke, their voices carried none of the authority you had grown up under. They spoke of the bank, of debts piled too high, of foreclosure looming like a shadow. They spoke of loyalty, of family sticking together in hard times, of bonds that should never be broken. But every word rang hollow against the memory you carried. The memory of rain, of silence, of whispers they had spread to shield themselves from shame while leaving you exposed. 3 years had passed since that night, but wounds often heal into shapes, and those shapes remain. You did not raise your voice. You did not accuse. The fire that once burned in your chest had cooled into something steady as steel forged in silence, not flames. You spoke with calm, the kind of calm that only comes when storms have already torn through and left nothing left to destroy. You reminded them. Not cruelly, but truthfully. You reminded them of a night Zoe had needed them, of a way they turned away, of a silence that suffocated more than any words. You reminded them of the lies whispered in social circles to protect themselves, lies that painted you as reckless, undeserving, even unstable. Their eyes fell at each reminder, and their hands tightened with shame. The grandeur of their lives had crumbled, but a weight of their choices still lingered heavier. And then, when they asked once more for help, you slid a suitcase across the desk. Inside was the exact amount they needed, no more, no less. "This isn't forgiveness," Flo's quote, you told them, your voice steady, carrying neither venom nor affection. "It's closure. Take it and leave." Your father's fingers shook as he opened the case. The bills inside gleamed under the office lights, but they were stripped of the power they once had. For them, it was survival. For you, it was liberation. Your mother's tears streaked through carefully applied makeup, smudging lines meant to disguise time. They stood together, shoulders heavy, clutching money that once would have flowed freely from their accounts. Now it was theirs only because you willed it so. As they walked out, their steps faltered. Not with arrogance, not with triumph, but with a weight that no riches could lift. And inside you, something shifted. Not the sting of loss. Not the burn of betrayal. But the quiet snapping of chains. For the first time, you were truly free, not because they had left, but because their hold had dissolved into nothing. The weeks that followed carried no bitterness. You found no need to replay their visit, no desire to trace their fate. Whether they sank under the weight of their debts or somehow resurfaced was no longer your concern. Your life no longer orbited around their approval or their neglect. Instead, your world was redefined by gentler rhythms. Dinners at home where Zoe's laughter rose above the clinking of glasses. Evenings filled with the melodies of her piano practice, fingers stumbling at first, then finding confidence as notes strung together like fragile threads of hope. Weekends by the river where Tom taught her how to cast a fishing rod, his patience wrapping around her like a second skin. Mornings where Denise filled the kitchen with the scent of fresh bread, kneading not just dough but love into every corner of the house. Life had narrowed, but in narrowing, it had deepened. The measure of success was no longer in the accounts balanced or the projects completed, but in the steady beat of contentment that filled your home. Sometimes, in rare moments, you thought of your parents again. You wondered if they ever sat in silence and remembered that marble foyer, if they ever regretted how their silence echoed louder than any thunderstorm. But even in those reflections, you felt no bitterness. Only distance. What once had been a wound was now just a scar, and scars, though permanent, no longer bleed. You had given them closure, not forgiveness. But in truth, it was you who received the greater gift. The freedom to live without waiting, without proving, without needing. You had built something lasting, not on their approval, but in spite of their rejection. And that was enough. Your company expanded into new cities, and with each office that rose, you carried the same heartbeat of your mission. You were never interested in coal skyscrapers or lifeless monuments. What you designed were havens. Spaces where people could breathe, feel safe, and believe again that walls could hold warmth instead of silence. You insisted that each project carry a part of your soul, the lessons you had learned in storms, the tenderness carved out of your scars. It wasn't just business. The profits flowed into things that mattered far more than balance sheets. Healthcare for employees so no parent would have to choose between a job and a child's well-being. Scholarships for students whose dreams might have otherwise been trapped in dusty corners of forgotten classrooms. And a foundation that quietly, but steadily, funded life-changing surgeries for children like Zoe. You remembered her, the small hands clutching yours, the laughter that should never have been muffled by pain. In her smile, you saw the proof that generosity could turn even grief into something luminous. Every choice you made was born from ashes. The pain you once carried had not been erased, but transformed. What once weighed you down became the fuel that lit the path for others. You had discovered the strange alchemy of suffering, that it could be remade, not into vengeance, but into compassion so wide it overflowed beyond your own circle. And that was the turning point. You no longer sought revenge. The longing to strike back, to prove yourself in the faces of those who betrayed you, slowly faded like a shadow at dusk. What you built was not about destruction. It was about creation. Brick by brick, decision by decision, you shaped a life that stood as your truest response. Not a bitter victory carved from spite, but a wholeness so deep that no absence could diminish it. At family gatherings held in your own home, the sound of laughter spilled across the yard, a melody sweeter than any applause. The gatherings weren't defined by blood alone, but by the family you had chosen, and who had chosen you back. Neighbors brought over dishes, employees brought their children, friends lingered long after the night grew cool. These concentric circles widened with each year, proof that love multiplied when shared freely. Zoe ran barefoot in the grass, her voice echoing under the open sky. She called out to Tom and Denise, the grandparents who had never once let her down, who had held her hand on nights when the world felt too heavy. Her freedom was not loud, but it was radiant, the freedom of a child who knew she was safe, cherished, unshaken. You stood watching, heart steady in your chest, and you knew this was the life you had dreamed of in the darkest nights. Not wealth alone, not recognition, but the simple miracle of belonging. The dream had come true not because it was handed to you, but because you had forged it with your own hands. The past, of course, had not vanished. It never would. Ghosts still whispered sometimes in quiet moments. Memories of rain-soaked nights, of doors closed in your face, of voices that once called you unworthy. But those echoes no longer pierced. They no longer had the power to wound. They had become shadows that proved the strength of the light you now stood in. The girl who once begged in the rain had become a woman who built her own shelter. And not just a shelter for herself, but a home for everyone she loved. The resilience carved into you became a fortress, but one with open doors and windows wide, welcoming those who needed refuge. Evenings stretched into long summer nights, the air humming with cicadas, and the soft glow of lanterns strung across the porch. You often found yourself sitting there, a glass of tea warming your hands, Mark beside you, steady as the oak beams that held up your roof. Together you watched Zoe's laughter mingle with the voices of Tom and Denise, who played games under the strings of warm lights. The scene unfolded like a painting of ordinary grace, and that ordinariness was its miracle. The world felt whole, not because it was perfect, but because you had chosen carefully. You had learned what to keep and what to leave behind. Some ties had been cut, yes, but others had been woven with more strength than you ever thought possible. You had learned that family could be found as much as it was given, that love chosen freely often ran deeper than obligation. The betrayal had been real. The wounds, once deep, had shaped you. But the healing grew stronger than the hurt. In that strength, you discovered a quiet truth. You no longer needed anything from those who had abandoned you. No apology, no explanation, no recognition. Their absence had once been a hollow ache, but now it was simply space you had filled with laughter, purpose, and love. You realized that survival had been your first victory, but creation was your greatest one. You had everything that mattered. The home built not just of walls, but of trust. The career shaped not by ambition alone, but by compassion. The child whose freedom was proof of your resilience. The partner whose presence was a reminder that love could be steady and kind. And all of that was enough. On those summer nights, as fireflies danced in the twilight and the porch lights cast a soft golden glow, you sometimes thought back to the girl in the rain. You wished you could whisper to her then, "Hold on. The world would not always be cruel. One day, she would rise and build a life so abundant, so radiant."